All right. It's not good morning because it's actually at night before I go to bed, but I am going to try to read another chapter of Bayonet Dawn by me, Scott Moon. No video on this one. I'm trying to use GarageBand to make a hopefully better quality audio recording. I've done a couple of test trials, cut a few bits here and there on the test, and now I am reading. So if I make any terrible errors, I'll probably chop them out. So this is Bayonet Dawn, Chapter 2, Gone. The Connelly orphans needed heroes more than most. Kevin, the second oldest of four, dreamed of military service, of glorious escape from a life that was both hard labor and easy routine. Sleep was not his friend. Each night he spent fantasizing about charging into battle with friends and heroes and shades of his grandfather Brandon O'Connelly, only to find nightmares he couldn't fight off. He never spoke about grandfather Brandon, not with his older brother, who was now the head of household, master of the single-room apartment where the Connellys lived. By definition, Kevin was a man. He could leave and start his own family, find a job on one of the solar wind farms orbiting Earth, apply to a university, or run with a neighborhood gang. He stayed with his older brother Arthur and his younger siblings, the twins. Menial jobs kept him close to home and ready to fight his brother's battles, even when he didn't agree with how or the why of Arthur's fantastic fury. At night he dreamed of his hero and wished he were like the honorable gentleman. When his imagination and his body gave out, he fell into an exhausted sleep. Nightmares came like clockwork. He didn't remember much in the morning. Fighting the Connelly dreams, his grandfather had explained one morning to a 5-year-old version of Kevin, only made the headaches worse. Just make sure you can force yourself into action the moment you awake, his grandfather had told him. Kevin remembered the day as the last time he saw the sun, even though that was not literally true. For some reason, he had his grandfather all to himself for an entire afternoon. They played war games in the park with toy guns carved from soap. Kevin Connelly, with the conviction of his infallible 5-year-old self, knew what he would do with his life. He never saw grandfather Brandon again. The reason for the outing had been simple. Kevin's mother had been fighting a losing battle in the hospital. His grandfather volunteered for a combat mission behind enemy lines after the doctors failed to save his daughter-in-law. Long ago, humanity had united and built starships and other technology to explore and colonize distant star systems. Unity lasted less than a decade after the first habitable world was found. Hundreds of Earth nations now maintain galactic fleets. A small country on Earth might also have its own planet somewhere else. Soldiers as skilled as Kevin's grandfather were welcome to re-enlist in whichever national, international, or interstellar force was offering the best deal, but he had always remained loyal to the United Nations of America, especially during the bad times. Kevin Connelly jolted from his sleeping pallet, gasping for air, muscles clenched for an attack that was in his mind and already invisible behind a blinding headache. There were two sources of weak light in the room: the glowing ember of a bootleg candlewick and the amorphous gray light of the moon on the other side of a thunderstorm pierced by lightning. Taking his first deep breath since the nightmare ended, he twisted on the pallet without getting up. He looked right and left, saw empty blankets, and resisted panic. The hazy nightmare from moments ago crushed the back of his neck like a hydraulic vice. He sucked air through his nose and across his teeth, darting his visions toward windows and doors in search of danger. Without a word, he threw off his scratchy blanket just as clouds broke outside the window. Silver light cut through the safety plastic. He saw lights in the 10th floor apartment across from his apartment, wondering how his anonymous neighbors could afford the electricity with honest work and fair power ration. After a titanic pause only possible for gods in North American storm systems, the rain crashed against the window, plunging the scene into darkness. "Arthur," he said, knowing his older brother was probably down the hall at his girlfriend's family's apartment. His big brother wasn't his concern. Arthur was a grown man, more than strong enough to head the family and do whatever he wanted, so long as he showed up to handle police, gangs, and rival families. Kevin worried about the twins, Ace and Amanda Margaret Connelly. The family domicile was a single room with all the grandeur of a terminally poor family of orphans. Ace and Amanda were gone. There was no place for the teenagers to hide in the dark room. He revived the candle and shielded it with one hand. Like many residents of Tower Building 595, they had modified the safety window to admit fresh air. Candles were illegal, expensive, and the only way to have light after curfew. For several heartbeats, he considered whether he should risk relighting it in the deflected gusts. The truth was obvious. He would only search the room to feel better. Wet wind tortured the outside of the window and created a fine mist through the homemade corner screen that gave him chills. Methodically as a factory worker, he searched the room with suppressed emotion and ruthless efficiency. The voice of his father, more of an idea than an actual sound in his head, walked him through the steps to calm his thoughts and control his pain. Long ago, before his mother gave up, his father smiled sadly and sang the pain and the nightmares away. Kevin remembered, would never forget either parent. He knew he should be thankful. His nightly misery was far less than the youngest of his siblings. Ace trembled after his nightmares. The intensity and irrationality of his behavior increased as he approached manhood, bringing all of his siblings to tears as he screamed himself hoarse and fought invisible creatures. That drove Arthur to spend more and more time at his girlfriend's apartment down the hall. Kevin pulled aside his little brother's pallet covers almost reverently, imagining Amanda holding Ace as she turned her sleepy smile upward in the grim, struggling moonlight. "Good girl, little sister," Kevin would have said. "I didn't hear you get up." "You never do." She would pause and stroke her twin's hair, like he was a child much younger than she was. "Bad dreams never leave him, but he sleeps when I hold him." Kevin wanted the conversation to be real and wished he could see them both. Even if he was angry at being woken up by Ace's hysteria and panic, the twins couldn't be gone. He hadn't really considered what it meant, other than the sensation of dread in his gut. Balling his fists, then stretching open his fingers, he arched his back and rolled his neck, expressing all of his lanky strength. He felt his height and his broad shoulders as he breathed like his father had taught him years ago. "Be ready, son. Fear nothing but the shame of giving up." A second search, quicker this time, energetic and grim and futile, led him to staring through the window at the city below. His hands remembered blankets he had shaken as though his quarry were small enough to disappear in the folds. He sensed the high utilitarian ceiling of the room and watched the dreamlike mist swirling from the window vent in the corner. This couldn't be real. Ace and Amanda couldn't be gone. They never left, never ran away, never disobeyed Arthur's draconian rules and curfews. "I must be dreaming," he thought. "People don't vanish from 595, not from the 10th floor." All of life's most important lessons came from his elders, and he missed them terribly despite the years. His father taught him to master his mind and his body, face each crisis with calm determination. His mother taught him all things practical, list-making and getting things done. His grandparents inspired him to courage. Now that he had searched the meager Connelly domicile and faced the desperate truth, a plan grew in his mind. He considered the details, wrestled with fear and anger, and watched the streets. Perhaps a childish part of his 20-year-old body hoped to see Ace and Amanda Margaret Connelly, street-level neon sparkling on wet skin and wide smiles. Clouds retreated across the city all the way to the horizon, which was a wall of even taller and more massive buildings. This place was not so much greater Kansas City as it was all of Kansas, the space industry capital of the world. Streetlights stitched the roads and bridges. Safety lights warned aircraft away. Neon street signs illuminated the ground level and the second floor of the building fronts. At major intersections, there were digital screens sharing time with governmental announcements, news, and advertising sequences. A line of armored vehicles moved down the center of the roadway. Cars and pedestrians moved aside and waited. The soldiers deployed into defensive formations, then searched the area in squads. Kevin drank in the vision. Just behind the Starship Army Corps soldiers, several police officers wearing tactical gear followed. The SAC belonged to the Starship Corps of the United Nations of America. The Starship Corps included the Starship Marine Corps, Starship Army Corps, Starship Pilot Corps, and Starship Civil Peace Corps. Kevin was probably the only person in the building aware of the distinction. His heart raced. He had seen soldiers in the city, but not often and not recently. They came for riot control or when a VIP gave a speech. This was different. The SAC soldiers were looking for someone. Moisture rimmed Kevin's eyes, causing his carefully controlled breathing to hitch. He'd do just about anything to follow in Grandfather Brandon's footsteps, wear the uniform of the Starship Marine Corps officer, and stand proud before the nation's enemies and detractors on land or sea, in the air or in space, thinking of better days when 8 Connellys, 4 kids and 4 adults gathered for Thanksgiving made him breathtakingly happy and heartbreakingly sad at the same time. Memories, for better or worse, came to life when he imagined his grandfather in uniform.